Ratchet Clank is a massive universe, with various galaxies that contain numerous levels, and today I'd like to share my top 10 favorite levels from the series with you all. It's more common to refer to them as planets in the RNC discourse, but there are many levels that aren't planets, instead being moons, space stations, ships, space, etc. So that's why I just go with the level term. I judge the levels based on what gameplay they have to offer, how they look, how they sound, and maybe even how the story plays out. That said, my criteria for loving levels will vary and probably seem inconsistent. I might include a level mainly because it contains some of my favorite writing, for example, yet I might exclude another that also has some of my favorite writing. It's hard to explain, but just know that my reasons for including certain levels will vary, and might seem contradictory when I don't include other levels that share similar qualities. These are just my personal favorite levels, and a more critical analysis of the levels would look quite different. There's no limit to how many levels I can include from a game, and I'm not forced to include a level from every game in the series. This countdown would have been a top 16 in that case. With that out of the way, here are my 10 favorite levels from the RNC franchise. I'm starting the countdown with a very integral level to the masterpiece that is A Crack in Time, Molonoth Fields on planet Tauren 4. This is the level that introduces the hover boots, probably the best gadget and traversal mechanic in the series, and while you traverse most of the level on foot, the level is still really fun before getting them, which speaks to how great this level is. It doesn't contain much music at first, but it makes for a very calming atmosphere, especially since there aren't any enemies at the very beginning, and the visuals are so beautiful. You talk to some Vollards that have very unique voices, and get some nice world building related to the Fongoids, which is foreshadowing for a later cutscene in the Great Clock, so that's pretty cool. Ratchet joins a Vollard to some industrial area, where he helps fix machines with battery bots, which is a fun activity. My only gripe with this level is the background noise in this area, as it's kind of grating. It makes sense considering the construction work, but it's tiring to listen to over time. Ratchet eventually reaches Azimuth, who is the best new RNC character post PS2 era, and rocks an awesome design too. The grind rail section with him is great, with lots of things happening on screen, some of the best music from the soundtrack, and some fun bickering between the two Lombaxes. The cutscene that introduces Azimuth is really interesting, and it's exciting that it ends with him giving Ratchet some hover boots. You do some hover boot training with him, and the courses are very tight and fun. You end the level with chasing a Sony to your ship, which is also great fun. What a fantastic introduction to such a fantastic gadget and character. You might not have the hover boots for the whole level, but the whole level is still great throughout, and the last third is incredible. To think this level is only number 10, but that means we're off to a great start, and there are 9 more fantastic levels to cover. Honestly, Up Your Arsenal doesn't have a very good selection of levels, as they feel very samey in both gameplay and atmosphere. Obani Draco is an exception, and I used to love it, but it's so short and bare bones, and while Metropolis is really good, it's a watered down version of the original. I only truly love 2 levels from this game, one of which being Quark's hideout, and the one on this list being Koros. This level is also quite short and straightforward, but it's just so cool. It has some of the best lighting in the game and looks unique compared to the other levels, and the music is an absolute banger, one of my favorite tracks from the whole series. I also love how it greets you with Slim Cognito telling you about the plasma coil being available, which is my favorite non-Rhino weapon in the series. It's a perfect fit for Koros, as the level contains many enemies, making for some exhilarating action. That's what I love about Koros. It's such a thrill to play through, especially when you have the bolt grabber, breaking so much glass and earning lots of bolts. This level is often described as bolt heaven, and it couldn't be more true, as it showers you with bolts, especially in challenge mode, with 20 times bolt multiplier, and 40 times temporarily when you smash the jackpot crate. I love not only getting so many bolts, but also the sound that comes with them, and the sound of glass constantly shattering is very satisfying too. The second half of the level isn't as destructive, but it's still pretty good, also having some cool music and fun enemy encounters. The level ends with a cutscene of Clank enacting Secret Agent Clank, which is such a badass scene. Unfortunately, it's followed by the reveal of a second, allegedly more powerful Bi-Obliterator, which is pretty lame, but oh well. All in all, it's a very simple, but also very satisfying level that never fails to give me a dopamine rush. Here's the level that started it all, though I do favor the version of the level that ended the original. That's because it's expanded, far more challenging, and you're way stronger too. Instead of being a less than 5-minute walk, this one takes maybe about 15 to 20 minutes, which is an impressive length for an old RNC level that doesn't contain branching pathways. You also have more combat and traversal options at this point. Now, the combat isn't exactly the original strong suit, which is why I don't put its levels the highest, but it's still really fun, and becomes more fun as the game progresses. I have to admit that there are a bit too many enemies placed throughout this level though, and mainly the Devastator, Visibomb Gun and Rhino are effective against them, given that most of the enemies are airborne and tough, often from a distance. So, why did I include this level? It's mainly due to its atmosphere, writing and poetic elements. It's quite a contrast to see this once bright, happy-go-lucky level with funky background music turn into this sinister, dark level with a blood-colored sky, not to mention the music being super ominous to fit the tone. It's also very poetic that you both start and end the game on the same level, which by the way is Ratchet's home planet, so the personal stakes are high, especially since Chairman Drek has the ability to destroy it. Even Drek himself points out the poetry of it all, and it becomes even more poetic when Ratchet and Clank use his only planetizer to destroy him, along with the planet he built. The final boss fight against Drek is amazing by the way, his mech looking awesomely menacing, and is capable of using many varied attacks, including killer Gadgebots. The fight even incorporates the Thruster Pack's ground pound move to stall the deplanetizer's activation, making for a dynamic fight with a sense of urgency. The ending between Ratchet and Clank is also great and very heartfelt. This level therefore has some of my favorite writing in the series, even though it's not the usual comedy that RNC is known for. It goes to show how mature the writing of this original game was, even though most might point to the future series for hard-hitting emotional moments from the franchise. While it has its flaws, this is easily one of the best final levels I've played, with mainly the writing and atmosphere carrying it, which reflects the game as a whole. Here's yet another level from the original, but unlike Velden, Nebula G34 has branching pathways, a design that the original prides itself on. This level has 3 different paths, and each of them are fun and distinctive, even the Clank section, which I tend to start with. I'm not a fan of the Clank section on Orxon, as it's long and uninteresting, whereas this one is short and sweet. Sure, the gameplay isn't anything to write home about, but there's something magical about exploring the outside of a space station, from a different perspective as Clank no less. The alien swarmers that Ratchet perceives to be tiny are now eye level, and the alien snappers tower over you, thus feeling more menacing, which makes sense for the atmosphere of this creepy area. The mystical background music is the icing on the cake, enriching the tremendous atmosphere. You can even revisit this place as Ratchet after obtaining the O2 mask, and it's fascinating how small the area suddenly feels. Next, I tend to take the shuttle to the Blarg warship, which has an even more ominous aura to it, as it kind of feels like a derelict ghost ship with very low-key, but haunting music. You soon reach the end of the ship, where you're invited to press the big red shiny button, which is such an iconic line that really entices me to press it. Turns out it was a self-destruct button, meaning you have to run back to the shuttle before time runs out. It is a very generous time limit, but it's still an effective design, given how people generally freak out over having limited time, and the obstacles also contribute to this. Ratchet and Clank watch a funny cutscene afterwards of Darlig Ratch being eaten by an amoeboid, Ratchet's reaction making it even funnier. Finally, there's the main path, which has the best gameplay of the level, mowing down swarmers that crawl over the walls and snappers that you're forced to release from test tubes. Even though the music is more catchy in this path, the tone is still as haunting as the others, especially when swarmers suddenly break out of crates. you eventually find the alien queen, which is the first boss fight of the game, and while it isn't anything special, it's creepy and fun, and attempting the wrench only skill point offers some challenge. You then buy the iconic grind boots from Fred, that you use on a single grind rail, which isn't much of a tutorial, but it just feels good to use them, and I loved grinding on the wall for a bit in the end. The level elegantly looped back to the starting point, as is usually the case in this game, and on the topic of the starting area, I love how you can see the whole space station through the windows, and that white station in particular looks awesome. The original Ratchet Clank is a masterclass in building atmosphere, and I think Nebula G34 is the perfect showcase of that. Tools of Destruction has a great selection of levels I love that just barely couldn't make this list, but Sargasso stands tall among them. It's an evolution of the open-ended collectathon levels from Going Commando, and while that is my favorite game, I'd argue that Sargasso is considerably better than those. Whereas those feel kind of empty and boring to traverse, Sargasso has plenty of visual variety, and flying across the different islands with the robo-wings feels so smooth and convenient. Despite how fast you can fly, completing the level takes a while, close to an hour, but it never feels like a wasted time, since everything I did was fun. From hunting all the Grunthors, to finding secrets hidden across the environment, and gaining bolts in the bank, it's all so satisfying. I think part of that satisfaction stems from how the level looks, as it has an awesome prehistoric theme, filled with dinosaurs, some of which you can even climb, which is so cool. The music is nice too, even though it's far from one of my favorites in the series, but it fits the vibe. Perhaps my least favorite part of this level is the main path, which isn't at all bad, it's just not as fun as the open world aspect of the optional content. There's still some fun combat along the way, and even a gelatonium section, which uses one of my favorite gadgets. Unfortunately, you do get one of the worst gadgets in this level, that being the decryptor, but it's used here sparingly, and it's made up for by getting one of the best weapons in the game, that being the Alpha Disruptor. Speaking of best weapons, you even get the Rhino 4 in this level, by trading all the holoplans to the smuggler. He's a controversial character in the RNC fandom, but I like interacting with him and his parrot, and Clank saying he'll choke the parrot next time is so funny.
Poor souls. Remind me to choke that parrot next time we see him.
It's nice to meet the plumber again at the end of the main path, who makes a fun fourth wall-breaking comment about not recognizing Ratchet and Clank in high def, and even gives them the tool that saves them in the end. At the end of the day though, it's mainly the gameplay and visuals of this level that makes it my favorite from Tools of Destruction, and maybe it would have been higher if the rest was as good. I said that some of my other favorite Tools of Destruction levels couldn't quite make the list, and that's because the newest RNC game Rift Apart delivered some crazy good ones that I just couldn't afford to exclude. One of them is Blizzard Prime, which is one of the more impressive technical showcases of the PlayStation 5's capabilities. Hitting these Blizzard crystals changes the look of the level on a dime, going from lifeless purple space to a lively orange mining operation. You switch back and forth between these versions of the planet, so it's basically 2 levels in one, making it really long, but it's so worth it. It helps that Rift Apart has my favorite traversal in the series, and I always get the hover boots before getting to this level. The game also has my favorite combat in the franchise, so enemy encounters are super fun too. It doesn't have my favorite Clank sections, however, but they're still good, and the one in this level has the neat reveal that the plumber is Gary's father. This level has a side path, and although it's not one of my favorites, it's still really fun, involving lots of combat. The best part of the level has to be the end, where you're on a grind rail that uses the Blizzard crystal gimmick, instantly switching between dimensions while grinding, which is incredibly impressive. Blizzard Primed and Ready plays in this section, which is by far the best track in the game, and carries over to the final crescendo where you fight thugs for less while also switching between dimensions. It's a terrific experience, especially in the purple space version, where gravity is reduced. I love using the hover boots in low gravity, there's something oddly satisfying about it. As for the story, you're only here to acquire a certain shard, and it gets destroyed in the end anyway, but the subplot between the 2 versions of the planet has some intrigue and funny payoff. I don't really vibe with any of the characters here, but it's mainly the gameplay and presentation that puts it on this list. Still, the writing might explain why it's not higher on the list, maybe also the fact that returning to it doesn't feel as mind-blowing as when I first played it, where I was absolutely enamored. The middle of the list isn't bad though, especially since we're talking about my favorite levels from my favorite franchise. While I think Police Are Prime is the most technically impressive level of Rift Apart and the one that has the best atmosphere, Savali is the level with the best gameplay and writing. I said I love the open collectathon levels, and this is the biggest one from the entire series, yet it doesn't feel empty, and traversing it is no issue. You appropriately get the hover boots here, and they're at their best in this game, allowing for much more flexible movement, and to use the wrench while wearing them. It would have been awesome if you could use weapons while hoverbooting as well, but at least the transition to combat feels natural, and this level has a bunch of great enemy encounters, with plenty of rift tether opportunities. There are also plenty of collectibles to find, including gold bolts, pieces of armor, and Savali exclusive collectibles called Lorbs. These are really fun and interesting, since they contain voice recordings for Lombax who maps dimensions for Ratchet's dad Caden, and he often references other PlayStation franchises, like Sly Cooper, Jak and Daxter, and Little Big Planet. Although most of this level is optional content, the obligatory stuff is amazing too, offering some great combat and fun traversal challenges. The hoverboot challenges near the end are awesome, and play some of the best music in the game. This level introduces my favorite Rift Apart character, KT7461, aka Kit, and the conversations you hear between her and Ratchet as you play this level are genuinely touching, Kit showing a lot of self-doubt, and Ratchet trying to cheer her up. The scenes with them at the end of the level are great too, Ratchet talking about his own doubts when it comes to meeting the Lombaxes, Kit using one of Ratchet's name suggestions, and the badass twist that she can turn giant like Clank. This is followed up by a compelling backstory explaining that Kit is a warbot built by Emperor Nefarious, but decided to live on Savali in solitude, so she wouldn't hurt anyone. Ratchet accepts her despite that, adding Kit to the team, leading to other nice scenes later on. That includes another scene on Savali, where Rivet finds out that Kit was the warbot who destroyed her arm, leading to some engaging conflict between them. The Savali revisit isn't as good as the first time you're there, but it's still really cool to explore the underground catacombs. Now the enemies are skeleton iterations from another dimension, including a skeleton Grunthor, which Clank swears from.
You said it, pal!
The Mad Lad. The level ends with a Clank section, which is also pretty good, but Gary is sadly not included in this one. This is overall an incredible level, definitely my favorite from Rift Apart, and it has so much to offer. Velden from the original RNC is an amazing final level, but I prefer Going Commando's Yeedle by quite a bit. The second you land, you can already tell that shit's about to go down, with a gigantic Megacorp factory towering over you, showing that you're up against them now, after having worked for them throughout most of the game. The atmosphere is dark, with a pitch black sky and ominous music. You walk across the bridge, or grind over it like a true Chad does, and begin controlling bots with a Hypnomatic. This is fun, and it's cool that you have to use it in order to infiltrate the building. There are some great enemy encounters before entering, and when you're inside the factory, you're greeted by another ominous track, this one being my favorite in the game. It's so well composed, sounding really unhinged for most of it, but then it starts sounding hopeful, and ends triumphantly. I get chills every time I hear it. It goes so well with the action, which is so much fun at this stage, where you're at your most powerful. Yeedle also takes great advantage of the gadgets, whether they're mandatory or optional. I love the spinning platforms the Dynamo activates here, the last electrolyzer puzzle is a fun challenge, and the swing shot bridge makes a triumphant return. The general design within the factory is great, placing this big tower in the middle of a room that you can walk up with the gravity boots while fighting some robots. Killing these protopets by melting the ice with a Terminator isn't optimal, but it's just a fun thing to do. It's also cool that you have to destroy these two tanks while your movement is shifted by these conveyor belts, while having minimal cover. There's just a lot of dynamic designs in this level that makes it stand out. I love the writing in this level too, the twist that Mr. Fizzwidget was Captain Quark in disguise all along being one of the highlights of the game, having great setup and character motivations. The boss fight after that is a bit underwhelming, but at least it comes with a banger soundtrack. It also has some neat ideas, like the mutant Protopet using Megacorp ammo against you, and that you can use the tractor beam against it. Even in the boss fight you can use a gadget, which goes to show how well designed the level is, taking advantage of most of the skills you've learned throughout the journey. That, along with the fun writing and superb atmosphere, makes this my favorite final level in RNC. While Yedel is my favorite final level in the franchise, it's not quite my favorite level of Going Commando. That honor belongs to Bolden, for several reasons. The beginning of it is a tad strange, since the regular path is blocked by a force field, and you need to take a taxi to an elevator that takes you down to a peculiar underground traffic area. You use the levitator through this, and it's a fun section, but very different. You then reach a crossroad, and it's best to do the grind rail section first, since this is the only level that forces you to leave it when you've finished the progression path. That means the grind rail path isn't exactly necessary, but I wouldn't want to miss it, since it's really fun and has a cool construction design. It also leads to one of Slim Cognito's weapon mod shacks, which can be useful. Also, is it just me, or is this the level where you begin to really rack up some bolts by normal means? As cool as that grind rail is, the main path is undoubtedly the reason why Bolden is number 2 on this list. The Thugs for Less enemies here are quite tough and equipped with some deadly guns, so there are plenty of covers to hide behind. Some are breakable though, so you'll still have to be on your toes, and the thugs can use covers as well. Another gimmick this level often employs is fighting on gravity ramps, and while it can be a little clunky and the enemies usually fall off after one hit, it's a really cool concept. It's especially cool when this concept is combined with covers, while walking down the side of a building. Using its balconies as covers is such creative design. Even though I'm generally not a fan of using the Spider-Bot weapon, it's actually fun to use in this level, since the level design is kind of made for it, being able to walk on the gravity ramps, and it can be used to get a platinum bolt as well. The level ends on another awesome section where you walk down the side of a building, and then you sadly can't get the platinum bolt behind Robot Fizzwidget until you return. I can't talk about this level without bringing up its awesome soundtrack. It's so dynamic and catchy, and never gets old. I suppose the level doesn't have the most detailed visuals, but I still really like the warm colors. Also, the enemies in this level come with great attention to detail, playing rock paper scissors against each other before trying to kill Ratchet and Clank. The icing on the cake with this level is that you can access the Insomniac Museum from it, and in various ways. The intended way is to use this teleporter between 3 and 4 AM, sending you to the inside of a building where you have to kill some thugs before taking another teleporter to the museum. I love that there's a visible clock to let you know what time it is, and it's thankfully possible to adjust the time on the console to match the needed period. The way I usually do it is by taking the grind rail, intentionally hitting this obstacle, landing out of bounds, charge booting my way to this peculiar looking building, clipping through it, and then doing the rest. It's more fun and less of a hassle. You can also get to this out of bounds area by climbing a wall in first person mode or clipping through it with either the decoy glove or mini turrets. The Insomniac Museum is by far my favorite video game Easter egg, and it's cool that there are so many unorthodox ways to get there. Bolden is an amazing level that keeps on giving, making it my favorite from Going Commando. It's not quite my favorite RNC level, however, as that belongs to... I started the list with a level from A Crack in Time, and that's how I'll end it too, with my favorite level from the whole franchise, Lumos. This level has my favorite gameplay in the series, with expansive, yet compact level design, plenty of collectibles to find, and varied layouts. You start with a linear path devoid of combat and music, which sounds boring in concept, but it helps that Azimuth tells stories about him and Caden's exploration of this cave. It's very relaxing, until you reach the Tetramite nests, which are very thrilling, and it's fun to hoverboot away from the Tetramites. This section ends with a really engaging cutscene about the backstories of not only Azimuth and the Lombaxes, but Tachyon as well, showing how he tricked the Lombaxes into giving him the power to destroy them. It also finally sets up Azimuth's understandable motivation of wanting to turn back time to save the Lombaxes, and the whole cutscene is directed beautifully. The main open area is the real reason this level is number 1, as there's so much to do in it, and you're not forced to stay in specific areas for a time, which is why I'm not the biggest fan of Axiom City, for example. There are 3, count them, 3 Sonys to find here, and one of them in particular is so much fun to chase. You can even redo the path and take the other ramp to reach a gold bolt. Then you can drop down to the ground or another elevated area. This level has a great sense of verticality in that sense, and the level design feels so interconnected, with the best uses for the incredible hover boots. Killing the enemies is also fun, and there are certain mini-bosses you have to take out, but you can do them in any order you'd like. There are so many ways to approach this area, both in terms of combat and traversal, which I really am a sucker for. There's a turret section after you've exterminated the targets, and while such sections are usually annoying, it's pretty good here, and it by no means overstays its welcome, unlike certain other turret sections. Even after doing all this, the level still isn't over, and while that could have been tiring, it isn't, because while the final section is my least favorite part of the level, it's short and sweet. The level caps off with a nice cutscene of Ratchet finally being able to contact Clank, and it's cool to see Clank's reaction to Azimuth. It's also cool that the end of the level is right next to the beginning, which is some classic RNC level design right there. Lumos is a crack-in-time gameplay at its peak, and RNC in general. It might share names with the Cringelord from the PS4 game, but just know that this level had that name first. Those were my 10 favorite RNC levels, and while some of my reasons might not seem very consistent, that's just how I feel. Even though there were no limits to how many levels I could include from a game, I still only had 2 from a game at most, which might seem disingenuous, given that Going Commando and A Crack in Time are my untouchable top 2, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I love their other levels enough to put them on the list. Some of them are definitely honorable mentions though, and there are some levels from Deadlocked, Into the Nexus, and the PS4 game that almost made it too. In making this video, I realized how hard it is to rank the levels from RNC, as there are so many quality factors to take into consideration, and many of the levels are amazing. With that in mind, I ask you all what you think your favorite RNC levels are. Please let me know in the comments. That's the second week of Ratchet Clank Month 2021 done. Next week, I'll premiere the 4th Ratchet Clank dub, so if you haven't seen the first 3, I encourage you all to watch them before then. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully, you'll see me next week!